While there have been significant achievements in child health over the last 3 decades, millions still do not have access to essential medicines that are adapted to their needs and ages. The current approach to developing pediatric medicines is siloed. Research groups, product developers, pharmaceutical companies, regulators, funders, and civil society generally work independently, resulting in a product development landscape that is slow and fragile. To solve this, GAP-F was created to coordinate these independent groups to set global priorities and provide more consistent tracking of needs, actors, and funding flows. It can take up to 10 years to develop child-friendly formulations of new and existing medicines, if it happens at all. When one step in the process stalls or goes unfunded, the entire formulation can get dropped. The GAP-F network protects against these breakdowns and significantly accelerates the product development lifecycle. Bridging multiple gaps across this lifecycle, partners coming together in GAP-F have already demonstrated that child-friendly formulations can be made available at a faster speed in diseases like HIV and tuberculosis. Now, GAP-F is applying a similar approach across a range of diseases such as cancer, antimicrobial resistance, hepatitis, and neglected tropical diseases. With the appropriate funding and partners in place, we will deliver up to 10 formulations to the global market in the next decade. Help us fill the gap.
We need medication that is child-friendly, medication that is not bitter, that is easy to administer.
Together, we can ensure all children have equitable access to life-saving medicines.
Hello everybody, thank you very much for joining this very important session today. My name is Luis Pizarro. I'm the new Executive Director of DNDi. And I wanted first to welcome all the speakers, presenters this evening. We'll have a very distinguished guest from Malaysia. We'll have Nurafisa Hamza will be with us. We'll have Mohamed Abdulaziz from Africa CDC. We'll have representatives from Kenya, Netherlands, Canada, Zimbabwe. So thank you very much for joining. We'll have very important panelists also discussing this topic today with Carlos Jacinta from Penta Foundation, Jamie Nishi from Global Health Technologies Coalition. We'll have Dr. Jay Lyer from the Access to Medicine Foundation, Anil Soni from WHO Foundation, and Tapiwa Kujinga from Patam, Zimbabwe. Thank you also to Carmen Perez Casas from Unitate to facilitate the panel discussion. Of course, to all the partners who have been doing this, ECPAF, MPP, WHO, GAP-F Secretariat. This is very important to work together on this. And of course, thank you very much also to the co-chairs of the session, the Professor John Reeder from WHO, Charles Gore from MPP, and Chip Lyons from ECPAF. So I think I don't need to explain you why it's so important to take care about medicine for children here. And I think the movie was very, very clear on why treatments can be unavailable or non-existent in appropriate formulation. We are all here convinced about that. What is, let's say, the rationale for this meeting is that we really need to have a strong and collaborative partnership. And I know at DNDi, celebrating the 20th anniversary this year, that everything we have done, it's essentially because we were able to create platforms, to create very strong partnerships. So this is what we will try to do together tonight, and of course in the future with GAP-F. Because GAP-F was created to make optimal pediatric formulations available for children through prioritization of needs and gaps, accelerating those product development and access directly intervening where the needs remained unaddressed. I think it's good to remind why GAPF was created. We need for this political leadership, and this is, I think, the reason why MPP, EGPAF, and DNDi were working closely together to make that happen. And I think it's good to remember that WHA in 2016 had a resolution on promoting innovation and access to quality, safe, efficacious, and affordable medicines for children. That was agreed by member states. So doing this meeting during WHA this year was particularly important for us. I would like to introduce first Professor John Reeder, who will present a little bit. You're going to set the scene on where we are and how we need to work together. And thank you very much, all of you, again, for joining this evening. John, please.
Thanks, Louise. And you'll have to forgive me a little bit this evening for I will be referring to some notes because you could be getting completely the wrong talk if I go off the top of my head. There are so many things on this week. I think like many of you, actually remembering which day it is quite a challenge. So thank God it's Friday. So first, thanks to Louise. And we at WHO are really grateful for this opportunity, which has been created by DNDi, MPP, and EGPAF, among our closest GAPF partners. We're gathering here to reconnect with some of the gaps and what we need to fill those gaps and how we can move towards achieving universal health coverage. And central to that, the lack of high-quality pediatric medicines and the necessity for addressing that issue. We're here today because despite years of investments in innovation work, many children across the world are still left without access to innovative solutions and treatments for many diseases that affect them. There are three root causes to this. The first is that with a fragmented landscape of pediatric drug innovation and access, stakeholders' efforts often focus on tackling just one part of the life cycle. Insufficient attention is paid to activities upstream and downstage, and this is obviously exacerbated by the lack of a global priority setting mechanism across pediatric health products and developments. This prevents us having a shared vision on which efforts we should target. The other key problem is that historical approaches to drug development undertake the various steps of the product life cycle sequentially instead of in parallel. We lose precious opportunities and a lot of time. There is an opportunity there to accelerate and innovate along the way and move this faster to a successful conclusion. Finally, when funding's not aligned across the full product development life cycle, even a single gap can stall the whole product, transitioning from phase to phase and bring progress to a halt. So, can we do this differently? Yes, I believe we can. We've done it before. This isn't without precedence. We've looked at malaria, HIV, and TB, and I think we can do it again more systematically across a number of different disease areas. We can do it by establishing priority drug portfolios of the most needed pediatric formulations, and then rapidly moving from evaluation of new products through development and appropriate formulation, and quickly to introduction and support and rollout and safe use of these. Supporting all of these steps and unlocking the barriers and mobilizing resources and intervening when it's needed is why GAPF was created. Providing a concerted response across the whole product lifestyle. That's why we're here. That's what we're about. We have a strong political framework, and over the years has prompted the global health community to do more to address the remaining gaps in development of safe and high-quality medication for children. Even today, at the WHO, and partly on to yesterday, we were talking about the global strategy for women's and children's adolescent health, and we were also talking about the resolution on clinical trials, which intersects and promoting clinical trials ecosystem that's more aligned and fit to address the needs of children is a really important part of this cycle as well. So there is will there. We have, the resolutions, we have the political will to move this forward. But now we need to review and see how far we've come and see how we can really recommit to this agenda. It's a time of opportunity. We've hit COVID. It was the only thing that everybody was thinking about and talking about. And while We still have a problem. We still have an eye on epidemic diseases and pandemic diseases. The diseases we had before, and particularly the groups that were most vulnerable and children amongst them, are still there and still need to be addressed. The GAPF network aims to deliver impact by leveraging WHO's mission and program of work as a global health policy leader and build on this unique network of partners, bringing existing capabilities and innovative approaches to tackle these challenging problems. And they are challenging. Let's not trivialize this. You know, will is one thing, political will is another, but there is also a great challenge to these. You know, it's something we've really got to focus on and address. The work of GAPF builds on active and meaningful engagement with regulators, industry, donors, and really importantly, the affected communities. And this is not just to inform the way we design better medicines for children, but also to be an active player and demand generation and product rollout. Today, we've got a chance to hear more from the countries on what's worked and what needs to work better. And we'll hear from other partners how we can improve clinical trials ecosystem to better enable research and development for children, and how to foster engagement with industry, donors, and communities to help us be successful. None of this we can do alone. We've learned this already in so many ways, so let's keep moving together. If we want to achieve this, you know, this is a big task ahead of us. It's an important task ahead of us. It's a task we can't turn our backs on. So let's move together, let's move fast and move forward. Thank you for your time and attention.
The Medicines Patent Pool is delighted to be involved in this. We've been involved with GAPF from the beginning, and we are in fact going to increase the human resources that we devote to this to try and continue and show our support. And it's actually quite interesting that GAPF has sort of developed and expanded the same way that MPP has, starting with HIV and then slowly expanding the mandate to a much, much broader remit, basically in answer to the needs. And one of the things when we talk about leave no one behind, I always think that people think about marginalized communities, people who are difficult to reach. They don't really think about children. And yet, you know, this is a group who are just continuously left behind. They are almost always an afterthought. And what GAPF is going to do is to change that and really reprioritize children. So I think that's extremely important. So we're delighted to have some country experience here. As you, if you've been around for the last few days, know that each of us needs to be in at least 2 or 3 places at the same time. So we were hoping that Pakistan would come, but I'm not sure that they will make it on time, so we'll see. But we are delighted to have Malaysia, because Malaysia, Pakistan, Thailand, and China were the 4 countries that led on the resolution that Luis talked about. That was really important in 2016 in showing the world's willingness to step up and do something for children. So with that, I would like to invite Nurhafiza Hamza from Malaysia. She is the Minister Councillor for Health at the Permanent Mission in Malaysia here. If you'd like to come and talk about your experience in Malaysia in looking after children. Fiza, please.
Thank you, Charles. Dear distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to speak at this important event. We are here today because pediatric populations is categorized under the vulnerable groups, like Charles mentioned earlier, who require careful handling. And this population should not be left behind in getting access to quality, safe, efficacious, and affordable medicines. We also recognize the right of the child to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health. As mentioned earlier, Malaysia co-sponsored the WHA resolution back in 2016 on promoting innovation and access to quality, safe, efficacious, and affordable medicines for children. Malaysia also recently co-sponsored a side event at the margin of the this week's WHA, along with Argentina, Colombia, Egypt, Georgia, Lebanon, North Macedonia, and Slovakia, on delivering cancer care for all, focusing on pediatric oncology, as we are particularly concerned with access to childhood cancer medicines. We understand that there are challenges in the practice settings with the use of unlicensed and off-label use of pediatric medicines. A study was done in hospitalized children admitted to intensive care units in Malaysia, found that out of 1,000 prescriptions analyzed, 27% were unlicensed use and 34% were off-label use. And we acknowledge that this is a common practice in many settings in some parts of the world due to the lack of availability of pediatric medicine. In Malaysia, all pharmaceutical products must be registered with the Drug Control Authority of Malaysia before it gets marketed. And we have a strong pharmaceutical regulatory authority with stringent requirements that ensure the quality, safety, and efficacy of pharmaceutical products in children. In terms of the supply of pediatric medicines, we strive to procure a ready-made package of pharmaceutical products for children. However, there are still gaps in the availability of pediatric formulation, and like many other countries, coming from pharmacy profession myself, we will need to do compounding for each appropriate dosage form to ensure that the medicines can be administered to pediatric patients. Malaysia has also conducted many clinical trials involving medicines for children, and this includes pediatric population with type 2 diabetes mellitus, intra-abdominal infection, and spinal muscular atrophy to further contribute in the research and development on age-appropriate dosage forms. We also participate in pediatric clinical studies for MMR vaccine, influenza vaccine, and pneumococcal vaccine, and a study on the evaluation of ranibizumab on infants born prematurely with retinopathy that will help provide additional data on safety of these medicines on pediatric population. In addition, the Ministry of Health Malaysia has implemented several national health policies and plans. We have the Malaysian National Essential Medicines List that has been implemented since January 2000, which includes medicines that are considered essential for the treatment of common diseases and conditions. The NAML is regularly updated to ensure that it reflects the latest evidence and best practices. The current edition comprises about 469 chemical entities that includes pediatric medicines. We also have our National Medicines Policy, which aims to promote equitable access and rational use of safe, effective, and affordable essential medicines of good quality to improve health outcomes of all Malaysians, including the vulnerable groups. We are proud of our national immunization program that provides free vaccinations to children in Malaysia with the aim to prevent the spread of infectious diseases and protect children's health. The Malaysian NIP was introduced in the early 1950s and designed based on the WHO expanded program on immunization. Malaysia NIP has expanded protection against 13 major childhood diseases, and this is one of our achievements to ensure children have access to routine immunization. We recently changed our pentavalent vaccine to hexavalent vaccine for vaccination against diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, hepatitis B, poliomyelitis, and invasive diseases caused by Haemophilus influenza type B. We hope that this will promote compliance and increase the immunization rates for children. Lastly, we have the Know Your Medicines program that has been implemented in kindergarten and primary schools, which include modules for teachers, educational materials such as storybooks, and the integration of medication-related messages in primary school textbooks. These initiatives collectively strive to ensure the dissemination of vital information about medications to young learners, as it may help in enhancing health literacy among children, equipping them with necessary knowledge and skills to make informed decisions about medication usage, and also empowering children to gain a sense of responsibility towards their health, enabling them to actively participate in their own well-being and advocate for safe medication practices. Malaysia will continue to provide access to quality, safe, efficacious and affordable medicines for children through our pharmaceutical regulatory agency and implement relevant policies supporting this objective. We will also strive to strengthen our research and development of medicines for diseases that affect children, continuing with educating and training through our Know Your Medicines program in rational use of medicines for children and to enhance the health education of the public. I thank you for now.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiza. It's very impressive. I'm particularly impressed with your school children education program. That's really advanced thinking, I think. Really fantastic. I'd now like to turn to Africa CDC. Dr. Mohamed Abdulaziz is the head of the Division of Disease Control and Prevention. And Dr. Abdulaziz, in the context of the Public Health Order for Africa framework, what's the role of the CDC in supporting the introduction and rollout of medicines for children? So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and let me thank the organizers for inviting Africa CDC to this very important discussion. It's even more important for Africa because in 1950, only about a tenth of the worldwide children live in Africa. But by the middle of this century, 1 billion children will be living in Africa, representing 37% of the world's children population. So what you're doing here is very important for Africa because we know we have a young population, and we thank you for it. Africa CDC, for those who don't know, it's the Continental Apex Public Health Institute created by the head of states of Africa in 2016. Operationalized in 2017 and tasked with the prevention and control of diseases among the member states of the African Union. In this regard, when it comes to formulation for children, I would like to take it from, like you said, the new public health order that we are championing and pushing for Africa involves 5 pillars. The first I'm going to talk about is Africa CDC, working with the African Union, of course, want to strengthen continental and national public health institutions on the continent. So when the good work, different partners, and when you finish the presentation, you see so many partners there, you should have strong national public health institutions that you work with in Africa that can look at bring what you're doing into national focus and scale it up, ensuring that the goals for which everybody is working to get drugs formulated for children gets down to the community, and you get very good people in the Ministry of Health, in the National Public Health Institution to work with. Again, the African Union has deliberately created 3 continental institutions, and all of these are very important when it comes to medicine and especially formulation for children. The first is, of course, Africa CDC. I will be talking a little bit more about Africa CDC, but let me talk about the second. We have the African Medicine Agency that is about to become fully operationalized. It wants to make it easier for companies, drug companies, and everybody to be able to formulate drugs that are safe, that are effective, affordable, but most importantly, quality assured, and medical products across Africa. So that institution, when it comes on board, will do a lot in ensuring that when drugs formulation for children, I heard Malaysia talking about quality, you can be able to have a continental partner to work with that will ensure that maybe the time wasting in terms of quality assurance is reduced. One important area that we do neglect on the continent, which Africa CDC want to put such light on, is the workforce. And that's the second area for the new public health order. When you talk about clinical trials, when you talk about any stage of drug formulation, right from the basic research to clinical trials to post-market survey, you need humans that are experts in that area to work with. And you need them, when you work in Africa, you need them on the African continent. So one of the things we're doing in Africa CDC is identifying the critical area of shortage, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. And for each of these areas, including clinical trials, we're identifying what are the gaps the member states have, and using the different workforce development interventions, really led by the South African President Ramaphosa, to see how we can intervene. Is it in the bioinformatics area? Is it in the area of molecular biologists? Is it in the area of clinical trial experts? So all of this we are doing. The third is the expanding manufacturing of health consumables, which also include local manufacturing. During the COVID-19 intervention, we realized that 90% of health consumables are produced outside the continent, and that cannot be good for the health security of the continent. If you put the children formulation, it may even get as high as 97%. So we want to really support our member states to be able to have the capacity to expand manufacturing of health consumables, including drug formulation for children. Deliberately, we've made it a medium to long-term intervention, working with different partners. We worked with WHO in ensuring technology transfer and other things, especially for the COVID-19 vaccine, and want to really expand it also to routine immunization and also other form of drug formulation. It is very critical that we have partnerships. Africa CDC believe in action-oriented partnerships, like what you're doing now with the Global Accelerator, the GAP-F program. We believe we cannot do it alone. We have to have partners who will bring in deliberate intervention, accelerating the process because the more you accelerate, the more you reduce people who do not have access to medication right there in the community. And finally, we've realized on the continent that the government of Africa, member states, are not paying enough attention to financing health, local financing of health. And one of the things Africa CDC is doing is to work with the member state to increase, they make the declaration in Abuja, to increase local financing of health to 15%. And if they can keep to what they have agreed upon, it will go a long way in meeting all these gaps, challenges we're having in the health sector. So using all of this and, of course, strengthening another continental institution I forgot to mention is the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is now based in Ghana. It will make it easier for not just drugs and other consumables, goods worldwide, to be moved seamlessly across Africa. Meaning, if you have a factory, a pharmaceutical industry in Egypt, you can ship it across Africa without much barrier. And that is another institution that we're looking at to see how we can strengthen to make movement of medical consumables, drugs easier on the continent. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. As you so rightly point out, the demographics mean that if we don't succeed in Africa, we don't succeed. So many of the children will be there. So it is absolutely critical. And just delighted to hear and to know and to be working with Africa CDC on so many of the things that you mentioned, whether it's local manufacturing or the regulatory, all of which are just critical parts of this. So we're now going to have a short video from Canada, because it's wrong to assume that it's only low and middle income countries that have issues about access for children. This also happens in high income countries. So the video is from Catherine L'Italien, who is the co-founder and medical director of the Rosalind and Maurice Goodman Family Pediatric Formulation Center in Quebec. And she's going to talk about some of the challenges and solutions they've had there.
My name is Catherine L'Italien. I'm a pediatrician and the co-founder and medical director of the Goodman Pediatric Formulation Center based in Montreal, Canada. During my journey, I came to realize that across the globe, those caring for children have to struggle with the fact that many medicines given to the youngest ones are not child-friendly. The lack of pediatric formulation forces pharmacists, nurses, parents, caregivers to manipulate the dosage form designed for adults, for example, by crushing or splitting adult tablets to treat sick children. Although compounded medicines serve an important unmet medical need, they cannot be viewed as equivalent to commercial form produced through good manufacturing practices and deemed safe, effective, and stable by regulatory authorities. In fact, compounding has multiple inherent limitations, including taste issue, limited stability, data, possible altered absorption, as well as lack of information on bioavailability. These manipulations can result in increased error, translating into underdosing or overdosing with therapeutic failure or unintended adverse events. And it can also contribute to poor adherence because of intensified taste issues. As such, developing pediatric formulation and ensuring that the largest number of the 2.2 billion children worldwide have access to them is critical and equally important. So with these considerations in mind, in 2016, the Goodman Pediatric Formulation Center was created at the CHU Saint-Justin in Montreal with the ultimate goal of improving access to child-friendly formulation. Among many things, we conducted a retrospective study that showed that almost half of the frequently compounded liquid medicines were actually available as commercial form just south of the border in the United States or in Europe. So this study showed that Canada, a middle-sized, high-income country, is lagging behind when it comes to ensure access to suitable pediatric formulations. So these results triggered advocacy work with multiple partners, including the Canadian Pediatric Society, Children Healthcare Canada, Pediatric Chairs of Canada, Institute for Safe Medication Practice in Canada, to name just a few. And we decided to focus first on regulatory changes, engaging a dialogue and a collaboration with Health Canada and asking them to implement a pediatric regulatory framework with three main elements. First, a pediatric rule requiring manufacturer to submit pediatric data to support a pediatric indication, as well as to develop a pediatric formulation when use in children is anticipated, which is similar to what exists in the States and in the European Union for many, many years now. Second, a trusted foreign decision pathway allowing pediatric submission to rely on regulatory decision by a trusted foreign jurisdiction. and not asking for additional information or data. And third, pediatric-specific incentives to encourage industry to submit pediatric formulation to Canada. We can think of accelerated review or reduced registration fees, for example. So where are we now? Actually, I'm very happy to share that Health Canada has been listening and came up in 2020 with the Pediatric Drug Action Plan with 3 main goals: increasing the development of pediatric medicines and formulation, improving access to pediatric medicines and formulation, as well as improving labeling to provide more information to Canadians. And as part of this plan, Health Canada has recently launched a national priority list of pediatric drug initiative with the aim of getting a better understanding of the scope of unmet pediatric needs in Canada. And among the eligibility criteria for inclusion on that list, a drug must be approved for sale in a trusted foreign jurisdiction with an established pediatric indication and pediatric formulation. And ultimately, this project will highlight to industry which drugs are urgently requiring commercialization in Canada. So that's on one end. And on the other end, it will inform Health Canada on which incentives or which facilitated review pathway they should consider to encourage industry to submit pediatric medicine in our country. So the online medicine nomination process is now closed, and the nominations are currently being reviewed by Health Canada with the assistance of their pediatric external reference group to create a first draft of a list of drugs to prioritize. And then a broader consultation with Canadian will follow with some revision, and hopefully a first final list will be available on Health Canada website at the end of 2023. I must say it is very exciting to see that this collaboration between Health Canada, the pediatric community, and many other stakeholders is now translated into tangible actions. And also it's very pleasing to see the complementarity of our work with what GAP-F is doing in terms of evaluating and improving the pediatric suitability of the formulation on the World Health Organization model list of essential medicines in children. And I do hope to see closer collaboration and experience sharing between our organization in the coming months. So at the end, children deserve the same standard as adults, and it is our responsibility to make it happen. Thank you very much.
So I think that's a very important message in there, what advocacy can do to get the governments to take action. And you were talking about this earlier, John, the importance of political will. So this can be achieved, and I think it's a really good lesson. We're going to take sort of interventions from the audience at the end. So now it's my great pleasure to hand over to Carmen Perez from UnitAid. UnitAid have been a great supporter of GAP-F and of generally of pediatrics. So, Carmen.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles, and hello, everybody. Hello, friends. I'm delighted to be here, although I'm not sure you will be, because I'm asked to describe what UnitAid do first in children, in pediatrics, and that can take us the whole evening. But I promise I will just simplify it really very much to reiterate our commitment. And actually, even before I joined UnitAid, the first intervention had been on pediatric antiretrovirals and trying to break that market failure of lack of products, high prices, lack of formulations. And since then, UNITA's commitment to pediatrics has only expanded and increased, and actually looking at other areas where market failures are also leading to catastrophic consequences. And now is when I start hearing, looking like Charles, when he was explaining how MPP has evolved and also expanded to other diseases. So yes, it's because actually HIV has shown us a lot of lessons that we can indeed leverage and apply here on how to, first of all, identify the roadblocks in the pathway to access, but also what are the potential strategies to address them. So HIV as the locomotive, as Bernard once said, to me, it's a very useful approach. And that's why I also want to congratulate GAP-F. It is enabling this fantastic convener, strategic, and enabling entity that is actually pushing the agenda, indeed, from HIV to other very important diseases that affect the most vulnerable. So with that, and without further ado, we have a brilliant panel today that will be sharing with us their expertise. I first of all want to say I like as well to have heard from countries first, that put a very useful perspective. And now I'm going to start calling to the panelists we have. So first of all, Carlo Giacinto, the Executive Director of PENTA and the co-founder of PENTA Foundation and Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Padova. Jace Ayer is the CEO of Access to Medicine Foundation, where she engages with global industry leaders and tries to bring a practical approach to what they can do to bring their health technologies successfully to countries. So that's going to be a very useful perspective, complementing the research perspective from Carlo. Then I'm calling on Jamie Bainishi, the Executive Director of the Global Health Technologies Coalition, an advocacy organization focusing on R&D tools and technologies, and with more than 17 years of experience in doing such stakeholder engagement, and previously having worked at DEVEX as well. Anil Sonil, I think also known by many, and the CEO of the WHO Foundation, and with, again, more than 2 decades of experience in public, private, and non-for-profit around always the common topic of access, increasing access to health technologies. And finally, Tapia Kujinga, who is going to bring the CSO's perspective and having been the director of the Pan-African Treatment Access Movement. So thank you. And I will then going to be asking questions to each of you, and we can have, if time permits, then a second round or have questions from the public afterwards. So first of all, Carlo, we know we are all here because we all agree that there is an issue with R&D and that children are left behind. So what would you think should be done to improve the ecosystem so that the needs of children are also addressed in the research and development efforts?
So, thank you very much, Carmen. Well, I had some ideas before last week when I went to a meeting in Cape Town organized by Africa CDC, organized by the European Commission, EDTCP, and supported also by Gates, with the focus was developing and strengthening the clinical trial ecosystem in Africa. And that was really a very, very interesting meeting because there are different people, different point of view, and different approaches. So I came back with some ideas around what we should do. First one, we need to prioritize. We need to know exactly what we need to do in order to make a difference, really to make a difference in terms of public health, to meet the needs and the public health needs. And this is not very easy because, of course, the needs are different in different countries, in different settings, but we really need to be able to meet this challenge, and that is crucial. Then we need to do some studies who are feasible. But my concept of feasibility is not just the feasibility of the study, the feasibility of the clinical trial, the enrollment capacity, the timing, the milestone specific for the trial, but the feasibility also includes the capacity that we have to implement the study result. It doesn't make any sense if we are going to do a trial and then the result will remain there. I mean, we have a long history of very, very successful clinical trials, very solid result, but then the results were not implemented in the country where they were made. So that, I think, is a second extremely important point, which is linked to the third one, which is a very clear scientific question. I mean, in any study that we are planning to do, we need to know exactly what we want to achieve, scientifically, but also in terms of implementation. I want to give you an example. Now, we know that there are very effective monoclonal antibodies to prevent RSV infection. This has been studied and tested in the north, but also in some African countries. But then the implementation of this intervention, which can be really a game changer, because we know that RSV infection is a major killer in lower middle income countries in the first 6 months of life, can be really much more challenging than expected. So we might probably increase the gap between the rich country or some rich setting and the rest of the world, which is really in need for this intervention. So I think that prioritizing the possibility of developing monoclonals is just one shot at birth in lower middle income countries to prevent RSV. This is a prevention strategy, it's not a treatment. It's going to really to be something extremely important. So prioritization, feasibility of the intervention, and then designing the clinical trials accordingly. The fourth very important point is that we need to be creative in terms of study design, but not in terms of innovative methodologies, where we can include adaptive platform, which can be modified according to the different need, or comparing different strategies for the same disease or the same strategy for different disease. But we also need to combine this clinical trial approach with real-world data. So be able to develop an infrastructure which could allow us, first of all, to identify the needs. What is the mortality for neonatal sepsis in one setting as compared with others, or RSV, but also then with a real-world data infrastructure to be able to look at the impact of our strategy and what we are going to implement. I mean, so combining the research with the possibility to identify the question and the prioritization of the research with the downstream part to evaluate the impact and then to modify the guidelines of the strategies is absolutely crucial. And that is something that we start discussing with Africa CDC, European Commission, and a lot of other stakeholders, because this is really a very important priority. But also another important thing is that we need to start strengthening the research capacity. I'm a researcher, so I'm thinking in this perspective, a research capacity, but there are a lot of fantastic sites all around the world in lower middle income countries. I mean, we as Penta, we are running several studies in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and the best sites in the world are really coming from African countries or Thai countries, for instance. So this is really, we need to build around this fantastic site and great, very successful experience. And we need to start from a mapping. We need not just to map the name and where they are, which is of course essential, but really to develop capacity building around this, let's say, excellence which exists everywhere. And that, I think this is extremely important. So it's not a top-down approach, north versus south, but it's south versus south and also south versus north, I think. This, I think, is extremely important. Then the last point that is extremely important, of course, is being able to mobilize resources, but mobilize resources in a light of a sustainability plan. I mean, it's not just a matter of looking for funding for one trial or for one specific approach, but what we need to do is really to mobilize resources in a coherent way and in a very strong partnership way. Because resources are not just money, but are capacity building, are infrastructure, our willingness to collaborate. The willingness to collaborate is a very, very important resource that we need really to consider and to put on the table as much as possible. So thank you very much. I don't know whether it's been a bit too long.
So you are lucky because I left my phone there, so I don't know if it's been long. It didn't look to me. It was really important. Everything you said, as you said, extremely important. You make very important points. And also the linkage with the prior panel on the need to indeed build from the South and leverage the expertise that is out there. And also I like that you raise, in addition to the practical points, you raise the issue of, where are these vulnerable populations? I was in the World Congress of Pneumonia earlier this month in Madrid, in Spain, and I was sitting with a Nigerian representative who told me she was responsible for 40 million under 5-year-old babies. That's the whole population of Spain. I was thinking, the whole Spain is a kindergarten, can you imagine? And this is the fee they have, the challenge they have. So the respiratory syncytial virus, monoclonal, and other opportunities that we are seeing here, we need them to be accessible where they are needed. Totally in agreement, thank you for that. So now, Jake, I'm going to have to ask you a very easy question. Is actually how we can close the gap in access for children and delivery of medicines. I guess that you can bring the partnership experience to this very important question as well and open. Thank you.
I don't know who came up with that question, but I want to tell you the silver bullet. No, not really. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the accountability mechanism on bridging that gap, right? I mean, what GAPAF brings today is something that we did not have many years ago, which is a very clear single set of coordinated priorities so that it is clear to anyone who gets involved what to get involved in. So when you focus, you get something done. You get the attention of senior leaders, whether it's countries or companies, in investing in access. And I think that's an area that we've recognized a lot. An accountability system comes only after there's very clear set priorities. Today, Christine spoke a little bit about the encouragements, the incentives, the engagement activity that is being created by different countries to get private sector to invest in this space, in this critical space, where there are lots of problems. A part of that, countries and companies do recognize that more and more populations or staff working in companies are starting to say, what are we doing about children? Right? A few years ago, we published a mini ranking on some of the companies that we've been evaluating independently for a number of years on their investments in R&D for child formulations and to fill some of the gaps that have been illustrated today. And only a few companies actually featured there because we measured the companies and some invest and some don't, right? What is actually in your pipeline? How much are you investing? And any of the companies that were not featured in that ranking then got a very nasty message from all their staff to the leadership and CEOs of the company saying, we don't care about children. So I think priority number one, set the priorities, coordinate the priorities so there's a clear set of priorities on there. Point two, that's what that has to be brought to senior leadership of companies to invest, co-invest. Alongside public players in order for them to get engaged in pediatric R&D and remain engaged because R&D doesn't solve issues unless you actually have access at the end of it. Early access planning, nothing reaches patients. You have this huge inequity gaps that we've seen in time and again, whether you're talking about infectious diseases, pandemics, or non-communicable diseases, that you will not solve the equity gap unless there's early access planning and a guarantee that vulnerable populations anywhere in the world get access early on. And I think the last thing is you need a mechanism of influence around the industry and around public partners. And that's where we try to bring in investment firms. So we work with over 100 investment firms, and they need to more and more demonstrate to their clients that they are invested in responsible practices, which means investing in companies that care about populations that are left behind. I don't have this silver bullet, but I thought I could just weigh in on this.
That's fine, and you brought a very important topic, accountability. So will we come back to you later on how you will track that and how we can make changes as we see to course correct if things are not happening adequately. But let me go to Jamie Bay. So from your point of view as well, we would like to understand the opportunities precisely on accountability on access to pediatric medicines, and particularly in the context of the World Health Assembly, as well as the other, the resolution, etc., and other multilateral bodies. please.
Sure. A couple of reflections and stories to put it all into perspective. I work at the Global Health Technologies Coalition, where most of our history has been focused on drugs, vaccines, diagnostics for poverty-related neglected disease. But when COVID hit, it became how do we get COVID, drugs, vaccines, diagnostics, oxygen therapy, everything, PPE to everyone in the world. And that became the focus. Within 1 year to the day of when a public health emergency was declared, I was one of those few privileged people living in the United States who was able to get a COVID vaccine. I had 3-year-old twins at the time. I waited 15 more months from the day I was vaccinated to the day they were vaccinated. So the entire time I spent focusing, which we still failed on, right? Global access to COVID technologies. We were in parallel, not focused as much on the day job part of it, as a mother sitting at home waiting for the day for her kids to be vaccinated. This is, as you said, leave no one behind, and that leave no one behind is not a global inequity, it's a everybody inequity. And we have to keep that in mind every step of the way. And we have to keep that in mind and humanize it as we come into these big meetings, as we come into the World Health Assembly and say, how do we make, I always say it's a marathon, not a sprint, incremental progress to all of the things that need to be enabled to get end-to-end access to products. That starts with the community alignment. That starts with, the patient communities, the affected populations, those of us who work in different technology types, different health areas, coming together and saying, this is the aligned mission. And it's been really exciting to see GAP-F flourish in this space. We would like to see this happen on a global level and actually see the GAP-F model expanded, because never before have I seen a partnership like this one that literally has been able to cut through the noise, come in and say, what is the demand? What are we missing? Let's develop target product profiles for what we are missing. Let's talk to the funders. Let's get them to fund what we are missing. Are we there yet? Are we making progress as fast as we want? No. But the agenda was set. The priorities have been elevated. How do we hold accountability to that? We keep pounding the pavement. We keep asking WHA after WHA until we are heard. This afternoon, Sir Jeremy Farrar, our new Chief Science Officer to WHO, was on the floor. And really exciting news happened in the last 2 hours. Talking about the clinical trials resolution, he came on the record and stated WHO's commitment to inclusion of pregnant and lactating women and pediatrics as a research priority in clinical trials. Can we look to a day in the future where our children are not left behind as we get vaccinated as adults? That is a huge moment. Now we're going to hold accountability to that. As we come into the next WHA, what progress has been made? What evidence do you have? Are our children getting vaccinated? Are they getting the therapeutics that they don't have? Are they accessing monoclonal antibodies? Not just for the health areas you described, but malaria monoclonals. There's so many monoclonals that we could do. We can't just say it's expensive. It's not. It's not fair. We can't just say it's hard to deliver. Then we work on the TPPs. We go back to the beginning. And then we go back and say, we're going to do subcutaneous delivery of a malaria mAb, right? But we keep going back and back and back. We adapt, we track, and we keep going until one bottleneck gets unclogged and the next one gets unclogged, and then we hit the next one, and then we might hit a clinical trial barrier, or we might hit a regulatory barrier. But we will keep progressing every step of the way. And I think, as John said so well at the beginning, the challenge that often happens in the R&D space is that you've got the funding stopping and starting, and the science doesn't stop and start at the same pace as the funding. And that double bottlenecks all of these things. So anything that we can do to open those doors every step of the way is what we're going to continue to work on.
Thank you very much. Perfect. We count on you to be rendering accountable all those. So, Anil, from your side, from the WHO Foundation and your experience, how do you think the private sector investments in pediatric medicines, what are the opportunities on these private sector investments, and including as well the increase in accountability that we expect to see from those investments?
Sure. So I think the question to me is intended to focus on how do we raise more money to do this work, which I will talk about. But as I reflected on it, I actually thought it might be helpful, especially given Jamie's comments just now, to reflect on what do we need to get the private sector as an industry to do differently? And why doesn't industry do the things that Jamie just said? I'm very aware this week that we're sitting in rooms where all of you, there's 60 people in this room, and you're all experts at this. So can anyone raise their hands? Who needs convincing that we should be accelerating access for pediatric formulations? No, okay. So preaching to the choir a little bit. So I'm asking myself, what can I share that's of value, actually, to all of my friends and colleagues in terms of this information? I think all of us are here because 3-year-old twins, not 3 years old anymore. We have children in our lives, so we see the need. Let me ask another question. Who here works for industry? Who works for a manufacturer? Okay, or has worked for a manufacturer? Okay, so not a lot of us. So I'm going to take some time actually wearing that hat. I've spent half of my career...
Your risk of not having any coffee or tea or...
Exactly, right. I was the bad guy. Now I'm not the bad guy. No, but I want to talk about that because I think it gets to this question. The GAP-F and all of us need to solve for gaps, pun intended, I suppose, in why industry is not developing these products. And so when you ask, what do we need to do to get the private sector engaged, I just want to start with industry, and then I'll come to philanthropy at the end. When I worked for industry, I spent a number of years at a manufacturer that actually made the most volume, Martina, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, of pediatric HIV medicines, right? So this is a good company. But one of the things I learned being on the inside was how much it mattered to solve a very basic equation. So if you work for a company or with a company that's a partner, the equation you're solving, this is third grade math, is profit equals price minus cost times volume. And profit matters. It's not bad. Profit is actually what drives the creation of the companies that actually make these medicines. So, and we can have a separate conversation over many drinks about regulating profit. I'm happy to do that. I'm a democratic socialist. But right now, profit is what drives these companies. And the challenge with pediatrics, and I want to go through that equation, is that that equation does not work for children when it comes to a company. And that's the equation we have to solve. So working together, how do we solve that equation? So price, and this came up in an event today with Jay and the WEF, the price pressure on pediatric medicines is not healthy towards encouraging new development because everyone's solving for the cheapest possible price. So price is low for pediatric medicines, particularly when it comes to low and middle income countries. Volume is low by nature, right? Because these are typically smaller populations. And oftentimes we have fragmented procurement, which just worsens that element of the equation. And now I want to talk about cost, right? The other element of this equation. Cost is really high for developing pediatric medicines. Again, I'm sharing this as someone who used to work for the Global Fund in Chai and then went and worked for industry. And so I got a perspective working for industry of how cost is so high. R&D cost is not trivial for pediatric medicines. And it's not what typically manufacturers are solving for. They're going to solve for where they're going to get the most margin in the market, right? That's what drives their company. That's what drives their business model. And when it comes to R&D, let's say we have 100 scientists doing the clinical research at a company. Where do you allocate that human capacity? It's not even just about financial capacity. Where do you allocate that human capacity? You allocate it towards the products that are going to have the higher margin. So the opportunity cost is quite high. The manufacturing costs are quite high. I worked on a product that DNDi also worked on, of course, the sprinkles of lopinavir ritonavir, which turns out there wasn't much of a market for, which I'll come to. Hot melt extrusion. Who knows what hot melt extrusion is? It is why Kaletra is so expensive. It is one of the reasons. The equipment we had to buy to make that product cost us tens of millions of dollars. That is a very high CapEx, capital expenditure allocation for a company for a product that doesn't have a lot of margin attached to it. And one of the challenges of that particular product is by the time we were ready to sell it, same thing with Cipla, there was pediatric dolutegravir. Great, but it actually made it really hard for me and my colleagues to go to our executives at a company and say, let's keep on working on pediatrics, because they said, well, where's the return on all of that equipment we just bought? There wasn't any. We actually lost money on that product. And I'm not saying this to ask you to go, cry for manufacturers and cry for the people who are working as executives for these for-profit companies, but actually to come back to your question, Carmen, and also why I think the GAP-F's model is so important. We have to work with manufacturers to solve that equation. And what the GAP-F does and what people in this room do incredibly well are different elements that de-risk that equation, that math equation for the manufacturers. The reason why a target product profile matters, and again, pediatric dolutegravir deserves a lot of credit. It's almost because we were so fast on that that the Kaletra product for HIV, for the pediatric HIV product, didn't have a market. But why that matters, it's the quote that's always attributed to Wayne Gretzky, which I don't think he actually said, which is skate to where the puck is, not to where it is, but to where it's going to be. So helping manufacturers develop a product that will be relevant, not now, but in 5 years, so that you're optimizing that R&D expenditure. That's incredibly important. The regulatory engagement is incredibly important. We, again, at the company that I worked for, the conversations we were having with the FDA on pediatric dolutegravir, thanks to partners in this room, were fundamentally different than the conversations that we had with FDA on our adult products. So it's actually, you were facilitating engagement with regulators that was distinct. And there's more, volume guarantees, pooled procurement. I mean, all of the mechanisms that the GAP-F is mobilizing is what helps the private sector, because the industry is the private sector, mobilize more relative to the needs of children. So I want to, again, because there's not that many people in the room who've worked for industry, I hope that was helpful. Again, this is a room of people who are committed. Resource mobilization from philanthropy, because I think that's, Carmen, what you actually wanted me to talk about. I'll just say a couple of words there. Yes, we need money. First, we need money from governments. And everyone looks to a business and say, write us a check. Everyone looks to a philanthropist, to the billionaire, and says, write us a check. Actually, I think the work here at the WHO and with the World Health Assembly is so important because we need governments to be allocating more resources towards the development of pediatric products. And there is some of that already. Many of you are already aware that regulatory agencies create incentives to see a pediatric investigation plan. That's great. It also is totally insufficient. Again, when I was in industry, we worked on Protomidid, one of the first new DRTB medicines in 50 years. It was amazing to me how, and I love the guys at TB Alliance and the women at TB Alliance. It's an amazing organization. But even there, a nonprofit agency that's developing a new medicine for TB, it was not the priority. The priority was, let's get to market, let's make sure we can sell this product, let's get the extension of exclusivity as a consequence of the pediatric investigation plan, but that was not enough to accelerate the pace of developing the product. So it is an existing mechanism in government, but not enough. I actually think we should push, and this is where people in this room I'm sure can be very powerful, with the G7 to look at not just aid budgets, but even Ministry of Health budgets. The budget of HHS is a lot bigger than the ODA money that comes out of the US government. So how do we think about convincing donor governments in particular to allocate more resources towards the acceleration of pediatric formulations? Because, by the way, it benefits kids in the United States and Europe and Japan too. So why don't we target those resources? And then yes, on philanthropy. And on philanthropy, I think what's important, and the GAP-F has been terrific, and we've been doing work at the WHO Foundation with the GAP-F to mobilize resources. I think we have to be thoughtful about how do you show for a philanthropist that this can be catalytic. This is great, but we need to calculate ROI, return on investment, which is not something we often do in this community, so I think that's really important. Secondly, we need to make sure that we can meet the focus of philanthropy. Everyone likes to talk about unrestricted contributions. You're not going to get those from philanthropists. Philanthropists say, I care about cancer. Okay, you care about cancer. Great, that's an element. And I know we didn't show the wheel here, but the GAP-F has a beautiful resource mobilization framework that says, okay, if you care about a hepatitis, come and work with us. You care about cancer? Come and work with us. You care about TB? Come and work with us. And I think that's been really helpful. And lastly, I think you have to make it personal when we're appealing for philanthropic resources. And this is where, again, I give credit to the GAP-F. We're moving in that direction, but this is why UNICEF and DNDi, by the way, credit to them, they have great materials that make it about the personal story. And yes, this is about children, but talking about it in technical terms rather than emotional terms isn't what's going to convince a philanthropist. So those are just a few elements on the private sector side of resource mobilization, which is the philanthropic funding, which is what I think you wanted me to talk about.
Very useful tips. Thank you very much. And you make me think as well on the different business models. We need to have the conversations with industry, and it's not the same when it is when pediatrics represent a niche in the market, for example, on HIV, on MDR, TB, or when it's malaria or other diseases. We need to account as well for the potential market and volumes, and that's a totally different discussion, but also thinking on leveraging the tools. Meltestration is a particular case, but there are many investments that could be better leveraged and used for different purposes if with GAP-F and others we are able to prioritize, as many of you have said, and come together with TPPs that actually leverage on the investments we have already done. That's also possible with the long-acting, with the new formulations. There are many areas of leverage there. But the most important, the resources. Thank you. And then I'm coming to our last first round of questions to you. in terms of the CSO's perspective on what do you think is the role of the organizations in the civil society in this effort to address precisely the fragmented landscape of the pediatric innovation and access to medicines?
Okay, thank you so much. So just to maybe give a bit of perspective on civil society involvement in access to treatment. Our entry into, the mainstream access to treatment movement was triggered mainly by HIV. And previously, civil society was fragmented. We probably had very, very few people working on access to treatment and access to medicines and diagnostics. But the HIV pandemic actually created this movement where we started working together, where we started discovering our capacity to be able to achieve change. So I can say that we did achieve quite a lot, and certainly in many low and middle income countries, if it wasn't for civil society, governments would not have been prepared to put their people on ART. So we started pushing for universal access to art as way back as the early 2000s, with organizations like the Treatment Action Campaign in South Africa, as well as the ACT UP in the United States. And my movement or my organization was responsible for coordinating advocacy activities in sub-Saharan Africa. So we actually have got quite a number of advantages as civil society, which a lot of people sitting in this room may not have. The first advantage we have is we can actually hold governments and other stakeholders accountable. So if my friend Ibrahim here shames a country for not performing, and he's a staff of the Africa CDC, he'll find himself in trouble. But this is what we do. This is what we get paid to do. We can actually bring the evidence to show country X is not performing according to its commitments, and that's part of our work. So accountability, I think, especially in African countries, is one huge problem. We get a lot of commitments. I mean, when you look at commitments which were made around health, around HIV, around non-communicable disease, and whatever across the board, so many. But when it comes to implementation, you'll find that there is very little implementation or zero. So that is where we come in as civil society to ensure that governments live, according to their, commitments. The second advantage, obviously, that we have is that we actually are a bridge between the top level, I don't know, maybe you call them the grass tops, and the grassroots. So we can actually bridge that gap. We have a symbiotic relationship with communities. We are actually embedded within communities. So we know their lived experiences, we know their challenges, and we are able to package those challenges in a way that policymakers can understand, that industry can understand, and that top level stakeholders can understand, so that those challenges are then, turned into solutions. So I can go on and on about, our advantages, but within the context of pediatric treatment, just to go back into our experience, around 2010 or 2009, we realized that we've been talking about access to treatment for art, and our focus was on adults, but we had a lot of children. Even, the statistics were telling us that, there were lots of children who were being infected through vertical transmission. And in collaboration with a number of partners, we then came up with a campaign which was called Campaign to End Pediatric AIDS, SEPA. And that campaign was implemented in 6 countries in Africa. But the reality that dawned on us at that time was that it was possible to end pediatric AIDS. At that time, there was evidence of the efficacy of ART on, stopping the exposure or stopping vertical transmission. So we were quite convinced that we had all the necessary tools, with the necessary technology to stop vertical transmission. And so we built it on a number of pillars. One of the pillars that we built it on was early infant diagnosis. And at that time, there was no point of care technology for testing either children or adults for HIV. But I remember, we started talking to a certain university in the United States. They came up with a point of care technology, and now point of care technology. It's now something that is so common in my part of the world. But there was a point where it was not available, and we had to talk about its discovery, talk about its rollout. And University of Cambridge also got on board, and it's now SOP in many healthcare centers in low and middle income countries. But we can look back and say that's one of our successes, one of our achievements. So as civil society, we were able to look at the challenge, because when we are dealing with the person directly, when you are dealing with the challenge directly, it actually makes you want to look at a solution. So if you're an industry, you may not be embedded within the patient community. You may not be able to see or to witness what they go through, But if you are a civil society organization and you are dealing with mothers who are coming out of healthcare centers, maternity homes, with children who are infected with HIV, and they have to live with them, through their, to adulthood, and having to, be on alert all the time. It actually makes you want to do something. So civil society is definitely, a very, very important partner, a very important stakeholder in ensuring that firstly things happen, right? And secondly, getting stakeholders to act and to react, as well as, engaging with policymakers. Our policymakers, especially in low and middle income countries, may not be aware of a lot of things which their constituents are going through. So civil society is able now to, to articulate the issues and then get a response. So I don't want to repeat some of the issues which have been articulated here, but I just want to maybe make a couple of points. So Anil talked about, the R&D on child-friendly ARVs. And I think it's something that is really important. I mean, before we had child-friendly ARV formulations, you had children having to take all these huge tablets, and, especially neonates, they can't swallow. So that was quite a breakthrough. But I think we want to see, more R&D in terms of other ARVs, that, our children have to take. Yes, for pharma, whatever investment, is made, it has to translate into a return. And that's where the, challenge comes in, that's where the tensions come in, because industry is looking at the bottom line. We are looking at people's lives. And definitely, if there is a will, the funding can actually be raised. I mean, I saw a very impressive lineup of partners and stakeholders in this initiative, which I really appreciate. And, when you've got that very powerful network, I'm sure unlocking funding is something that can easily be done. So, so industry, may not, may be able to do R&D without having to face the constraint of funding. But certainly, I think, we also need R&D on other diseases, neglected tropical diseases. There are diseases for which there is no treatment. And I want to thank DNDi for, for the work they are doing, because, they are focusing on some of those NTDs. But we want to see a bit more investment, or a lot more investment in those diseases, because they are killing a lot of children in Africa, for example. And there's no cure, there's no treatment. There's diseases like Noma, which is in Northwest Africa, for which I think there's no treatment. It's a very horrible disease. So we actually, would want to see, access to medicines for which there are there's no treatment right now. But also equally important is maybe, I don't know this actual language, to reprogram some of the medicines that are targeted at adults to make them friendly for children, right? So we've got a lot of diseases for which maybe you have to break a tablet, right? And weigh the child and make sure that the tablet is concomitant with the weight and everything. 1 minute. Sure. So I think that's something that is critically important. But also regulatory processes, that issue has been raised. Our regulatory processes, we've engaged with the regulators in Africa and talking to them about the need to ensure optimal market entry, so that you've got a medicine here, it's gone through all the phases, it's shown to be safe, efficacious, but the dossier is lying somewhere, in the National Medicines Regulatory Authority. So I think it's something that needs to be addressed by this, by the GAPF, to ensure, for example, that there's cooperation and collaboration in terms of regulatory processes. So thank you so much. I hope I didn't take a lot of time.
As I said, I don't know. I'm a very bad chair without a watch, but I have been. So it's anyway very useful that you expressed like that the different roles that you have played as communities, from the expertise on the end-to-end approach and to accelerate actually the uptake. So thank you very much. I think we have a Zoom, but I don't know, Sebastian, if there is anything or if there is time to respond to any question, or if we want to pass directly to... Okay, so we are gonna need to move forward and close. And I want then to hand over to Chip, I think, or if that is the case, to hand over to him. But first, I want to really acknowledge and applaud the panel, because you have given us very practical tips and on many different important aspects of this, as well as good news. So thank you very much. It was really good. And I'm going to...
And thanks to all of you. This is very impressive. It's 8 o'clock. Your stamina, your resilience, your staying power to be in the room is remarkable. I also would have bet an expensive dinner tomorrow night that with 13 speakers lined up, we were never going to end on time. But we're this close to ending on time, and I don't want to get in the way of ending in time, so I'm going to be very brief. I was torn here sitting because I felt like I could get up here and speak for another 45 minutes and provide anecdotes on so many of the comments and stories that the panelists, the other speakers, provided, just from my own experience over, I think I might be one of the oldest people in the room. What that translates into is having worked on child health and development issues for a number of decades. And some of you may remember from your studies that as we started the 1980s, the global immunization coverage rate for children was about 25%. By 1990, it was certified as 80%, less than a decade, going from 25% to 80%. That happened because of leadership. That's a little bit of a banal statement, but it's absolutely true. Leadership at WHO, leadership of UNICEF, philanthropy, faith organizations, the Catholic Church, Latin America, Africa, Asia, etc. Also in 1990 was the World Summit for Children. Also in that year, in that fall, the ratification of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We actually thought that we had changed the sort of commitment and understanding about children and the importance of prioritizing children. We did for a period of time. You avert your eyes and then the priority for kids goes away. Gavi exists because that 80% immunization rate of 1990 fell to 50 and 60%. There was not the kind of sustainability that was required. There was a separate leadership that created Gavi, and you won't know the history of that. Where I'm going with this is trying to connect a couple of dots, including what Charles said at the beginning. Children are virtually always left behind. That's not because anyone, Anil was asking people to put up their hands, and I'm not going to ask the question to you all. I've never met anyone that's against children. I have been in rooms where, because time was short and someone put their presentation up, in this case, sir, a professor, your presentation's just a little bit too long. Can you cut some slides? No problem, I'll take out the part about kids. It's exactly what we don't want you to do, right? And so it's not, he wasn't against kids. But he had to be reminded, and other people have to constantly be reminded to put kids forward, to call the question. You all are in prominent positions, and you're leaders. You sign off on budgets, you sign off on statements, you sign off on articles, on priorities. Ask all the time, what does this budget do for kids? What does this priority, how does this priority address or consider the needs of kids? Unless and until that happens in companies, in philanthropy, in ministries of health, in CCM submissions to the Global Fund's not going to tell you to do a bunch of stuff for kids. The Global Fund will respond to a CCM process that says, or if people at least ask the question, where are the kids in this? Don't see it. Your KPIs are terrible, by the way, on pediatrics, but we don't see the ask, the ideas, the programs, the budget, et cetera. All of which is simply to say, hats off to the leadership from WHO for coming up with GAP-F. It's not sufficient to have WHO and the partners, and EGPAF is a proud partner of GAP-F. But absent that, we can almost guarantee, I'm going to start to call it the Charles maxim, children will be left behind. Because of the partners, because of GAP-F, the leadership from WHO, it's creating a way to make sure, that's too strong a word, to increase the chances that children are going to be put into the mix, whether it's budgets, strategies, priorities, products. There are certainly complexities, including profit. I'm not against profits either. Where did Anil go? I say to some people, I want pharma to be wildly successful, because I want them to invest more in the kinds of things that children need. At the same time, I once was with the head of global health of a major, well-known pharmaceutical company. We were talking about kids and so on. Chip, I just assumed children were the first to be taken care of. I don't think I've heard such a naive comment from a very worldly, sophisticated person working in global health. You thought the kids were considered first? My goodness. So your voices, your commitment, the leadership of WHO, the kind of contributions EGPAF has founded on the premise, Elizabeth Glaser herself contracting HIV and AIDS through a blood transfusion. I won't go through that story. There was nothing being done at that time around pediatrics in the United States. This goes back to the 80s. That kind of leadership, commitment, passion, and so on, unique to a mother who's trying to save her 2 children with HIV, changed the face, the dialogue of HIV and AIDS in the United States. It was a family disease among heterosexual families of prominent social status and so on. That family was HIV positive. And so the gears turned. And in fact, I think it was just about 3 weeks ago that CDC confirmed from a very technical point of view the elimination of pediatric infections in the United States. I think there were 100 or 80 or something like that in a population of 350. And so similarly, WHA, Malaysia, your example, it's heartening because I do remember when immunization coverage rates were 25%. Now you're talking about pentavalent. Back then it was for the basic 6, right? I mean, the dream then is what you are doing today. And I want to emphasize the importance of the World Health Assembly. I want to emphasize the importance of member states. Bring it to the executive board, bring it to WHA, push for it, be that voice. Again, sort of a banal statement, children aren't at the tables, they don't have the voice. We all are really obligated to do that if we believe what we say, are talking about, and I have no doubt about that. The role of the WHO, the role of member states, the role of everyone in this room and others that we work with is just indispensable. Absent the work that you do, it isn't going to happen. But because of the work you do, we are looking at quite bright prospects over the next period of time, including the budgets required to meet some of the very aspirational goals that are captured by and motivating GAPF. So I just want to thank everyone. It's been already, somebody said, thank God it's Friday. You said that. It is only Wednesday, but it's Wednesday at 8 o'clock. It's been a long day, long week, and I'm sure everyone has an early start and the rest of the week. Thank you for your commitment. The organizers of GAPF are more than happy to follow up with those of you to find particular ways for us to move things forward. So thank you again. I think there's a bit of a reception or a drink, refreshment, whatever it might be, for you downstairs. Thanks. Thank you all very much for being here.